قراءة في كتاب العدوان على الحقيقة للكاتب البريطاني بيتر أوبورن، صحفي وكاتب وباحث بريطاني. تناول الكاتب أساليب السلطة في تزوير الحقائق. ركز الكاتب على أهمية الصحافة في روايتها الحقيقة للتصدي للروايات المضللة. طالب المؤلف السياسيين بالكف عن تضليل الجمهور.
My name is Peter Oborn, and I've just written a book about a subject which goes to the heart of everybody in the world who has any interest at all in politics or in power or in journalism or in foreign affairs and how we understand the world. My book is about the truth. How we find out the truth, whether it matters, and above all, how it gets distorted by very powerful people who have a message that they want to get out there in order to obtain power or baffle the public and fool us. My book is called, I'm just going to show it, it is called The Assault on Truth, The Assault on Truth. And you will see there on the front cover that there are two figures. There's Donald Trump and there's Boris Johnson. Boris Johnson being the British Prime Minister, former British Foreign Secretary at the start of the Yemen conflict. And although he's now, as British Prime Minister, being inert about Yemen, he was responsible for British foreign policy in the Middle East for some time as Foreign Secretary, and now as Prime Minister, that's his responsibility now. I show that Mr. Johnson and Donald Trump before him systematically lie, smear, cheat, and mislead the public. I show that has become an ordinary way of doing business. And also I show that the mainstream media collaborates with these lies. I focus in particular, let's just say, I focus on, in particular, or as part of my thesis, on the general election campaign in Britain in 2019, which saw the Conservative Party return with an enormous majority. And I go through the election itself and I see all of the things which were told about Jeremy Corbyn by Boris Johnson. I mean, I'll give you some examples. Now, of course, as we know, Jeremy Corbyn was the leader of the Labour Party at the time. If he'd won the general election, he would have become the British Prime Minister. And I'm just giving you some examples of the things which Mr. Johnson said that he wanted to, Jeremy Corbyn wanted to dismantle the British Armed Forces. That was completely true. Or that he would disband MI5, the security arm of the British state, or one of them. Absolutely untrue in both cases. He said that he had a plan for uncontrolled immigration, or untrue. He said that he would drive taxes up to the highest in Europe. Untrue. And at one stage, Mr. Johnson said about Jeremy Corbyn that he would wanted to sort of pursue rich people in Britain with a vindictiveness not seen since Stalin terrorized the kulaks. Now, the kulaks were an entire class of middle-class folk or slightly prosperous peasants in Russia who were exterminated in their millions by Stalin in the 1930s. Now, what Jeremy Corbyn wanted to do was maybe have a few mild reforms which could have turned billionaires, a handful of billionaires, into multi-millionaires. That was as radical as he got. Now, what I show is that here was a diet of complete falsehoods, which had no relationship to the truth, and were not challenged. Now, I'm a journalist. My belief is that journalism is about telling the truth, particularly when authority or those in power tell a different story. And what upset me greatly was that the British media just didn't challenge these lies. They were allowed to be published and disseminated without any pushback, any challenge, generally speaking, from within the British media. And that's when I decided to write this book, or when I started having the first thoughts that would led to me writing this book, because I was very upset. The job of a journalist is to tell the truth without fear or favor and without regard for power or influence. But I couldn't see that the British media, in this case, was doing that. It wasn't holding the British Prime Minister to account in this general election. And these lies about his opponents were being permitted. And so I tried to write about this. I tried to expose these lies in the British media, but I offered them to one newspaper after two newspapers. I offered them to the Channel 4 television, and they weren't interested in taking a report from me about how the British Prime Minister was lying in this general election campaign. So eventually I wrote an article on a free to view website that is called Open Democracy, and that severed my relationship with the mainstream media in Britain. I have only written, I think, 2 or 3 articles since then about politics for the media in Britain, and really I've been excluded, not for want of trying. I've tried to write for them, and really I have now become a kind of non-person in terms of the mainstream media in Britain, which is a pity, because I would like to tell the world the truth about how politics works, but it simply isn't possible for me to do that. Anyway, that is getting ahead of myself. So I wrote this article. I was then no longer able to write in the British newspapers as a general rule. I do continue to write, and please do read me here, because it is a subject which keenly interests people in the Middle East, I hope. It is for Middle East Eye. I'm very proud to write for the website Middle East Eye. Very kindly, they allow me to have a column, and I write for them. And I also write for the British Journalism Review a little. And for them, I normally write stories of journalists who what we in Britain call foreign countries, around the Middle East, some of them around the world, who have told the truth and suffered. And of course, those journalists have been tortured, sometimes have been attacked. Of course, in some cases, they're killed for telling the truth. Now, I will never forget, and I've had the honor, for instance, on Middle East. I've been a colleague of Jamal Khashoggi. He worked for the Middle East Eye as well. And we know how he suffered, what terrible fate awaited him for telling the truth about the Saudi government. And so it's very hard and dangerous to tell the truth in some countries. We know recently how many journalists have been locked up in Egypt. We know that the terrible fate of journalists recently in Afghanistan. Now, in Britain, on the other hand, we're very fortunate. As a general rule, we don't get locked up for telling the truth, although there is one important exception, and that is Julian Assange, who told a lot of whose WikiLeaks published a lot of the terrible things which happened during the war on terror, so-called war on terror. He talked about people illegitimately held in Guantanamo Bay, about the murder of innocent civilians, and so on. And Mr. Assange is held in solitary confinement in a British jail for, in my view, the crime of free speech. Now, but that is an extremely rare case in Britain. For the most part, the worst you're going to get is a complaint from a powerful person. Maybe you will fall out of favor with your newspaper, but your life isn't going to be threatened. Your family's life isn't going to be threatened. The worst, maybe you might fall out of favor with your employers and lose your job. But there are no physical consequences. There's no torture likely to come your way. And what upset me is that in the case of, the lies told by Boris Johnson during the British general election and subsequently, there was no, the mass media, generally speaking, backed Mr. Johnson. They chose not to expose his lies, and it really wasn't very difficult to do so. And the worst penalty which individual journalists could have suffered would have been a mild rebuke, or possibly, like as I did effectively, to be deprived of access to the mainstream media. But for me, I'm lucky. You can look at my face. I'm an elderly man now. I'm 63 years old. I've don't have any real, I can afford to take it's been a financial consequence, but there's been no other consequence. And I really honor those journalists who have died or been tortured and are still for the truth, and those who I honor who carry on writing in those circumstances. There are many people in the Middle East who suffer, who daily tell the truth in their reporting. And of course, they work under the knowledge that they may be killed or tortured, all sorts of, they are very, very brave people. I want to honor those people and say how much their work is respected. So that's why I came to write the book, because I decided after a while of watching Mr. Johnson, having won the election, I saw he went online. He told lies about his handling of the pandemic, the coronavirus pandemic. Many lies. So did his ministers. He told lies and falsehoods about the Brexit. He said all sorts of things which have turned out to be untrue. It was quite ironic that he said that he would, during the election campaign, that he would never cut in any way the British Army, at the same time as attacking Jeremy Corbyn, who he accused of wanting to do so. And then, of course, a few weeks ago, we announced that there have been 10,000 soldiers, I think, are going to be cut from the British Army. This is very cynical, and I want to, and I wrote this, and I want to explain the reasons I wrote this as a British citizen. I believe in Britain. I'm proud. I know many of the people in the Middle East would disagree with that, and I fully understand why not. But I am proud to be British because I think we have had a respect for the rule of law, for integrity. I think Parliament is a great institution because it enables power to be confronted. And I fear very much that these great institutions and traditions of Britain, tolerance, honesty, integrity, are being destroyed. For instance, in Parliament, the mother of parliaments, we in Britain call it, you might laugh at it, but I've been a parliamentary reporter for 30 years. We now see falsehoods and misleading statements put down on the floor of the House of Commons by Mr. Johnson and by some of his ministers. And according to the rules of the House of Commons, if you do make a falsehood or a misleading statement, you must come with as soon as you can and correct it. But that is not happening. There are no corrections, and this situation prevails where words. And what we have now got a situation is where words have no meaning, where there is no difference between truth and falsehood, and that means, of course, that politics becomes a form of entertainment, or everything moves on. There's no substance. There's no accountability. You don't know whether the Prime Minister is telling the truth or whether he's not telling the truth. Nobody, apparently, very few people care. That is not a way of running a country. It is particularly important because Britain is, or claims to be, a democracy. Now, we all know that dictators lie. That is one of the definitions of a dictatorship. In other words, if you are a dictator, you say what the truth is. And somebody who disagrees with that, what you say is the truth, you can kill them or you can lock them up. The truth is what you say it is. That is not how things are meant to operate in a democracy. In a democracy, there's meant to be challenge, there's meant to be consequences. If you don't say the truth, if you lie, you should be held to account. And what really upsets me, and what I write about a lot in the book, is that there are now no consequences. And the question, and I think in the Middle East, you know about this. Weapons of mass destruction was conjured up by the British and the Americans to justify the invasion, the illegal invasion of Iraq. That was a falsehood. I would say it was a lie, though Tony Blair and others with President Bush probably did just say they think they were misinformed. But that was a dark falsehood used to justify an illegal invasion, which has led to so much horror and suffering. So that we know that wars start with lies. And I hope that maybe if we start telling the truth, we can start to restore peace to the world. But we've got to start, first of all, telling the truth. And that is something I'm trying to urge my fellow citizens in Britain in this book, that we've got to hold. We've got to tell the truth, because unless you tell the truth, you cannot operate as a democracy. The philosopher Kant regarded telling the truth in politics as a completely essential thing. And the reason he thought that was that if you don't tell the truth, if you tell voters falsehoods and they believe you, and then they make their democratic judgments on the basis of those falsehoods, you are actually stealing from them their democratic rights, because and after a while you sow the most terrible distrust, because you just assume that all politicians lie, cheat, their words carry no weight. And that leads, of course, to chaos and confusion. And ultimately, sometimes, I'm afraid, to violence. Another thing which can happen, of course, and I think is happening in the West, and we've noted it, is that we're having a descent into what I might call, it's a long term, I apologize, tribal epistemology. What I mean is you regard you regard truth as what is said by your own side. And so it's a bit like supporting a football team. Whatever if you support Manchester United, everything that Manchester United does is good and true, where everything that Manchester United's opponents do is bad and evil. But no, that is no way. Maybe that is a way to be a football fan, but it's not a way. It really isn't a way to run a country, because then you're just building up hatred and adversity. And actually, the art of being a great politician is to bring people together. And to do that, you have to have a common standard of truth and integrity, which enables people to converse. So once they've started to agree on the facts, then they can start to solve their differences, because they can agree on a common standard of integrity. And so what I want to do with this book is to argue that now is the time to start to return to the truth and the decency which I believe my country at its best was able to govern itself, to hold, not to make impossible demands of politicians, but simply to restore a truthfulness to public debate. Now, if we don't do that, and people in the middle, you know better than I do, that if you get a bad leader who tells you lies, only bad things happen after that. And I hope very much that the book I have written, it's called The Assault on Truth. Here it is again. Can just make the world a slightly better place. Thank you very much for listening to me. It's been a real honor for you to allow me on your television program tonight.